When thinking about terrifying media, music normally isn't considered in the conversation, but when it is, it's always one step up above the rest.
Whether it be weird mainstream songs that upset people, disturbing rap songs that touch on horrifying topics, or, whenever it slightly creeps into the mainstream, black metal. Black metal is one of the most notorious and underground genres of music. Raw productions, barbaric and simple guitar work over screeched pain vocals are some of the main key points to the distinct sound of black metal, with the lyrics focusing on the occult, Satanism, and death. And while most of the people making music in the genre, especially in the second wave from 1988 to 1994, just use this evil image as just that, an image, there is one band from Sweden, that was way more than just an image, and created some of the most terrifying pieces of art ever created by men, using sounds of horrific improvised noise, unorganized guitar and drum work with bizarre instruments being played over them, and, most infamously, the sounds of the bandmates cutting and torturing themselves, live on tape, as vocals. And a band that has tragically been largely ignored by the video essay community when it comes to this style of content on dark music. So, I felt if anyone had to do it, why not be me? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, demons and angels, I give you the story of, in my opinion, the darkest and scariest black metal band of all time, Abruptum. The beginning. Abruptum was originally planned to start in 1987 by a man named Tony Saka, who went by the stage name It, but had its first two demos made within 1990, with the lineup of Abruptum for the first two demos being It playing the guitars and drums, Jim Berger, also known as All, doing the main vocals, and a man only known as Ext playing the bass. Tony Saka is a very interesting man, having a deeply traumatic childhood, filled with domestic abuse and violent people. He chose his name It to represent his hatred and disconnection to humanity. We'll talk a bit more about what Tony did during his life later on, but first, I'd like to do a deep dive through every single demo and album Abruptum has made, up to the last album with Tony Saka, going firstly through Abruptum's self-titled demo, up to Visonis Viris Nigre Milaitis, which I probably just absolutely butchered. Abruptum's self-titled demo is quite different from the rest of Abruptum's discography, being less focused on black metal and having a more death metal and grindcore influence. The cover of the demo is a basic piece of white paper with photos of a naked woman on what appears to be a sacrificial altar, a photo of a decomposed corpse, apparently symbolizing Ext, a photo of It, which we can't make out due to it being blocked by a text barrier saying, "Too disgusting to watch, too bizarre to resist," implying the photo of It is featuring him doing something incredibly vile. And, finally, a picture of what appears to be All, but is unconfirmed because this photo is extremely hard to make out what is in it. Getting into the actual demo itself, it's extremely hard to make out what is exactly going on in a lot of points in the demo, with multiple different noises happening at the same time, guitar solos that have no real melody, and deep, angry, vile growls from All. This is apparently the least favourite release of Abruptum for most fans of the band, which I personally don't get because I fucking love this demo.
I should probably say, before I continue talking about Abruptum, I am a massive Abruptum fan. I love them, I think they're great. They're one of the only pieces of music that's ever scared me, and I just think they're awesome. You should check them out.
This demo has some of Abruptum's best work they've made. The mix of grindcore and death metal with this raw black metal style production gives such a terrifying sound for a band's debut demo, and is what ties Abruptum's self-titled demo as my favourite band debut demo of all time, only being tied with Thorn's Grimmirk demo. The Satanist Tapes is arguably Abruptum's best and most infamous work, where a lot of the main ideas for where Abruptum was to head further into their career with begin, and it is chilling to listen to this demo fully with no breaks. In fact, this demo disturbed me so much that I didn't feel safe sleeping into my room after listening to it at 3 in the morning with all my lights out. This tape feels like you've been sucked into hell itself, a recurring motif that you will come across with Abruptum, and it's absolutely terrifying. The cover art of this demo features 2 photos. The photo of the now 2 members of the band after X was kicked out of the band, It and All, dressed in corpse paint, with All being labelled as the lead voxum, horde leader and rape, and It being labelled as guitar, drums, bass, voxum and evil noise, 666. With the last photo being what appears to be a face of some sorts. Above this photo is a label, which appears to be a dedication label, reading, "Our evil majesty and his servants, worshippers around the world, we will rule." Speaking of the person this demo is dedicated to, I was able to find this flyer, announcing the release of the demo, with it reading, Abruptum, Demo 90 out now, the Satanist Tunes. This tape is dedicated to the superior unholy ancient one, thy one without name or shape, the All. Before we move on to Abruptum's debut EP, Evil, it should be mentioned of the final band lineup change, when All was forcibly kicked out of the band due to his alcoholism getting out of hand after doing the vocals for the EP, and being replaced with the newest member of the band, a man named Morgan Steinhammer Hackinson, also known as Evil, the guitarist and founding member of Marduk. It should be also noted at this time also, it became the founding member of the True Satanist Horde of Sweden, which featured members of Dissection, Marduk, Watain and Dark Funeral, while also becoming steady friends with another leader of an even more infamous black metal underground group, coming from the neighbouring country of Sweden, Norway. I'm of course talking about Oystein Euronymous Arseth, the guitarist of Mayhem, and the leader of the Black Circle. We'll bring up Euronymous and the Black Circle's connection to Abruptum very soon, but now, just know that Euronymous was a massive fan of Abruptum, and an extremely close friend to it. After a re-release of the Satanist Tunes with an extra outro, Abruptum began work on their debut EP, Evil. The cover of Evil is just the picture of the self-titled demo of the woman on the sacrificial altar, with photos of both it and All being featured on the back cover. I personally think that Evil is probably Abruptum's weakest work from the original era of Abruptum, but is still an incredibly good listen, and I'd recommend it to anyone who is a big fan of the same noise-filled versions of black metal that Abruptum had pioneered. Now, one last thing before we get into Abruptum's debut LP, Obscuritatem Advoco Amplicter Me, which roughly translates to I invoke the darkness abruptly. As we know, All was forced to leave Abruptum due to his drinking, and was replaced by Evil of Marduk. The last thing I want to talk about is the fact that Euronymous had signed Abruptum to his label, Death Like Silence Productions. When interviewed about Abruptum's upcoming release of their debut EP, Euronymous said, "That record is the most fucked thing ever recorded. It's not normal music, but instead 50 minutes of pure evil. They had tortured each other during the recording in the studio, and you can hear that they are suffering. Damn good. Normal people should fear this record." I don't think I could have described this album in a more perfect way. Euronymous was completely right in that this is one of the most fucked things ever recorded, and sounds like absolute pure evil. This album is exactly how I'd imagine hell would sound like. It sounds like a direct portal to the underworld, and you have no way out and are just forced to listen to these screams of utter anguish and pain. The way they got these vocals, as Euronymous said, was through actively torturing themselves through the production of the album. Every single scream of pain you hear is real. Every single sound of utter anguish is real. All of it is real. While researching this album, I came across multiple anecdotes from the well-known metal producer Dan Swano, who was one of the main producers of Abruptum's debut LP. I've decided to talk about one where he discusses the way that this album made people feel back then, and the almost celebration of self-harm in the black metal scene. Trigger warning for self-harm. I Invoke the Darkness Abruptly was almost like a musical manifestation of the black metal self-harm culture, as perpetuated by the late Mayhem vocalist Dead. During the 90s, there were countless parties in Sweden with this album playing in the background, while people sliced their arms to shreds. This is genuinely terrifying to me, the fact that people were hosting parties where they listened to this album while cutting themselves is just so morbid and disturbing to me. Another anecdote from Dan is one where during the recording of the album, with Dan stating, "One thing I do remember is that Tony, who suffered from claustrophobia, requested to be trapped under the studio's 2-seat sofa. I'll lie down here on the floor, holding a microphone, and you put the couch on top of me. That should trigger a panic attack." I thought it was cool as fuck, trying to capture this genuine terror of being trapped, like, this is fucking evil, that's sick, it's weird. But that's what Tony wanted, so we helped him bring his idea to life. When looking at the original cover of the LP, it was completely black. No track listing, no logo, no band name, no information, nothing. With subsequent re-releases featuring the album title and a band name, with pictures of the band members on the back. And the Spotify release showing a picture of a woman kissing a skull. There isn't much else to say about this album, as I feel it's very much an album you have to listen to understand, and can't be talked about. So, if you have the balls to, I'd recommend listening to the full 50-minute album by yourself. Good luck. After releasing their debut LP, a very well-known event happened in the black metal scene, that being the death of its very good pal Euronymous being mistaken for a knife holder by his boyfriend. This caused the label in which Abruptum was signed to, which was owned by Euronymous, to be shut down, due to it not having an owner anymore, causing Abruptum's last release under Death Like Silence to be their sophomore full-length LP. Do you know, I'm not even going to try. It translates to "I will walk in the shadow of malice in eternal darkness and triumph," with a record-breaking one single song on the album. This LP isn't much different from the early LP, and in my opinion is Abruptum's most lackluster work, and is where I personally start losing interest in this band. Abruptum at this point begins ditching the black metal aspect of their style, and focuses more on the noise aspect, which I'm not a big fan of. But if you are a fan of this black noise idea, I'd highly recommend this LP to you then. After finishing their last album under Death Like Silence, Abruptum then released their final album with an original member involved in the band, and where this video will be ending, and the album before Abruptum becomes the basic bitch noise project run by Evil, which ruined its entire sound and reputation, Vi sonnes veris nigre metallis, which translate roughly to the sound of true black malice. This album was made entirely by it, as Evil was not able to make it to the recording process of the album, due to the fact that it had fled Sweden. As said, I do think that this is the last good thing Abruptum ever made, and I think is where the best time to stop our discussion of Abruptum's discography, as after this album, the band has turned into less of a band and became just a side project for Evil, as it leaves the band right after this album, and only shows up on one song later in the band's life as a guest vocalist. Past this recording, I feel Abruptum loses a lot of its charm and its scariness, with it becoming a dime a dozen black ambient dark noise project run by Evil, having barely anything to do with the original Black Death sound that Abruptum helped pioneer. Though, if you are into dark ambient / noise, I suppose you could check them out, but I will always say that Abruptum has always been better as the black noise band it started out as. Now that we've finished talking about the albums and music of Abruptum, I'd like to lastly talk about the controversies around Abruptum and all the horrid things that people around the band have done. As we know, it was the creator and leader of the True Satanist Horde of Sweden, which was closely related to Euronymous' Black Circle. I'd now want to talk about some of the most notorious members of both the True Satanist Horde and the Black Circle, the two groups it had a major part to play in, and some of their crimes and controversies. It might be best to start with the one band that was closest to Abruptum, with that being the band Marduk, and more specifically, the leader and guitarist of Marduk, Evil. As you know, Evil was a big part of Abruptum later on in his lifetime, eventually even taking over the band after it left the scene. Evil, and more specifically Marduk, is known for having lyrical themes connected to World War II, and more specifically, the Third Reich. This has caused Marduk to have to deal with many issues, mostly due to them being mistaken as an NSBM band. This has caused issues with organizations such as Antifa stopping the band from being played in America without having to jump through major hoops. There are multiple reasons for Marduk being controversial though, including their former bassist performing the Nazi salute on stage, the drummer and vocalist allegedly both buying Nazi propaganda from the Nordic resistance movement, and of course their lyrical themes covering the Third Reich and World War II. John Nodvite was the leader, guitarist, and vocalist of the band Dissection, and has an entire story I'll be covering in my next video. John Nodvite was a key member of both the True Satanist Horde and a satanic cult in Sweden known as the Misanthropic Luciferian Order, also known as the MLO, or the Temple of the Black Light. John was a very strong believer in the teachings of the Temple of the Black Light, and was an extreme Satanist. John and It had a very close friendship, with It even appearing as a guest vocalist on Dissection's album, The Storm of the Lightsbane. I don't want to spoil too much of John's story, as I do want to save it for the next video, but I will say that John was not a very sane or pleasant person to be around, and was frequently described as someone who was very uncomfortable to be around, and someone who often scared people, and eventually a full-blown murderer. In 1997, John and his friend and the leader of the Temple of the Black Light, Vlad, met a gay man named Yosef Ben Medor. After a night of drinking, he could tell they were Satanists based on how they dressed, and asked them to teach him about the religion. This ended with John taking both of the men to his house, where he grabbed a taser and a 9mm pistol. When Medor expressed cold feet about learning about Satanism, he tried to leave before being tased, shot once in the heart by John. Then, as Medor was lying on the ground bleeding out, either John or Vlad walked up behind Medor and shot him directly in the head. John was linked to the murder fairly quickly, and confessed to everything and was sent to jail for only 10 years. Now, the reason I bring this up is due to the fact that it used to be a major rumour that the reason It had left Abruptum and the black metal scene altogether was due to multiple death threats to his family and him by John. But this rumour was shut down by It's sister after he had passed away, saying that he left the scene due to boredom with the music. The final band I would like to talk about in this section about the True Satanist Horde before talking a bit about the Black Circle is a story that's not as well known about the rest of the bands, but is still a legendary band, and that is the story of Azubam Hani. Azubam Hani is a band that was associated with the True Satanist Horde and was big in the black metal scene in 1992. After a True Satanist Horde meeting at its house on Halloween in 1992, Angramin Yo from Azubam Hani got bullied by the rest of the group for not being evil enough. So, in order to prove them wrong, he went out, found a 63-year-old man, and stabbed him multiple times in the throat, nearly killing him. Thankfully, the man was able to be saved, and the police knocked down Angramin Yo's door to arrest him the next day. Now that we've finished talking about the Satanist Horde, I'd like to finally talk about the crimes of the Black Circle. And of course, I can't talk about the Black Circle without bringing up two people, with my first being Bard Faust, the drummer of the band Emperor. Faust was an extremely good drummer, being the drummer for both Emperor and another band called Thorns before it became a solo project. One day in 1992, after going out drinking in Lillehammer late at night, Faust was sexually propositioned by a man named Magne Andreasson in Olympic Park. Instead of respectfully turning down Andreasson and going home, Faust accepted Andreasson's position, leading him into the nearby woods, before stabbing Andreasson 37 times, while repeatedly stomping on his head. It was a vile and horrific murder that was not clean and quick. It was slow, sloppy, and painful, Upon returning to Oslo, Norway, the next day after committing the murder, he told both Euronymous and another man who we'll be talking about next, Varg Vikernes, about his crime. And instead of concern and reporting the murder to the police, Euronymous and Vikernes celebrated what Faust did by burning the Holmenkollen chapel together. The most sickening part about this murder was that Faust got away with it. In fact, he was able to get away with it for so long that he was able to fully record his parts for Emperor's debut album, In the Nightside Eclipse. It wasn't until a full year later in August 1993 that Faust confessed to the murder after being pulled in for the questioning of the murder of Euronymous, where he said he killed Andresen on impulse. Louis Cachet, also known as Christian Vikernes, Count Grishnak, and finally Varg Vikernes, is arguably the most influential and controversial black metal musician of all time, being the sole member of the infamous Burzum. Varg started Burzum in 1991 after being in a band called Old Funeral with members of Immortal. Around the same time he started Burzum, he had become a core member in the Black Circle of Euronymous. Varg had always been the quote-unquote black sheep of the Black Circle, due to his political views being less than ideal, with Varg, especially in the early 90s, being an extreme neo-Nazi. Despite this, Varg made a very big deal to leave his politics and belief as far away from Burzum as possible. Around this time, Varg and Euronymous had begun having a feud to see who was the most evil of the two, with the two basically having an edgy pissing contest. This contest became arguably the most infamous metal scandal ever, with Varg eventually starting to burn down churches all around Norway. Surprisingly, these burnings had actually nothing to do with Satanism, as Varg has always stated that he burnt the churches because the churches were desecrations of Norse mythology, with Varg being a pagan, worshipping all the Norse gods. Eventually, the beef between Varg and Euronymous became too extreme, as after Varg did an interview spilling all of the Black Circle's crimes into the mainstream light, Euronymous confessed to both a friend of him and Varg that he wanted to kill Varg by torturing him into the woods for a snuff film. Varg, being told about this and taking it seriously, drove all the way from Bergen to Oslo to kill Euronymous, stabbing him 23 times, 2 to the head, 5 to the neck, and 16 to the back. Varg was then thrown in prison for both the arson and the murder of Euronymous for 21 years, the maximum sentence in Norway. But that sure didn't stop Varg from trying to get out early, as he broke out of prison, took a family hostage, then got immediately thrown back in prison, being released in 2009 after serving only 15 years of his 21-year sentence. Now, I would cover Euronymous' story, but that story has been covered so much that everyone knows it, but I'll give it a very simple TLDR. Convinced his vocalist to kill himself and then took pictures of it for a bootleg album, was complicit in a murder, burnt down a church, and was a dick. Done. Abruptum was, and always will be, one of the most infamous and influential black metal bands of all time. And whether it be the terrifying backstory to the band's discography, the chilling instrumentals, or the way the music makes you feel, Abruptum is, and in my opinion, always will be, the most terrifying black metal band I've ever heard, due to its sound, the effects it has on you, and its real-world consequences. Thank you for watching.